Welcome to Bible Believers Fellowship. On this program, we begin our series on dinosaurs and dragons with a look at dinosaurs in the Bible. It is clear that dinosaurs are the dragons spoken of in the Bible. This means that modern science contradicts the Bible. And this means that Bible believers are going to be mocked and made fun of for believing the Bible when it says that there were dinosaurs up to and after Noah's flood 4,000 years ago. Listen to this example as actor Matt Damon attacks a professing Christian named Sarah Palin because she has said that she believes what we're about to study in the King James Bible regarding dinosaurs.
Really terrifying possibility. The fact that we've gotten this far and we're that close to this being a reality is crazy. Crazy. Did she really? I need to know if she really thinks dinosaurs were here 4,000 years ago. That's I want to know that. I really do. Because she's going to have the nuclear codes. You know, I want to know if she thinks dinosaurs were here 4,000 years ago. Or if she...
Regardless of what Damon and others might think, as Bible believers, we will not be intimidated or shamed into rejecting what the Bible teaches on this subject of dinosaurs and the Bible.
So you have the picture of the dinosaur from a few thousand years ago in ancient times in Central America. And we understand that dinosaurs are dragons are dinosaurs. Read one, think of the other, they're interchangeable. And we are warned as Timothy, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoid profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called. And that's 1 Timothy 6:20. And we discussed that the word dragon was the only word used for dinosaurs until 1841 when British anatomist Richard Owen formed the word from two Greek words, dyna equals terrible, saurus, lizard. So you could call dinosaurs terrible lizards because that's what the words mean. Everybody always wants a translation of the name. Well, there you go. Go to the zoo and look at the terrible lizards. And we see that the Bible makes constant references to dragons as real creatures. Here in Deuteronomy 32:33, their wine is the poison of dragons and the cruel venom of asps. God speaks of them as real creatures. And we see that biblical language is descriptive and not scientifically technical. And that is why in Genesis 1:21 it says, and God created great whales and every living creature that moveth. The great whales and the references to dragons are from the same Hebrew word, tanin. And we've discussed that the difference made in the Bible of dragons or dinosaurs are behemoth and leviathan. Behemoth is a land dinosaur. Leviathan is a sea dinosaur. And so now we look in Job 40 and we see this description of behemoth. It says in verses 15 and 16, Behold now behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. Lo, now his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. Now, up to this point, the only thing we want to make a note of is the fact that he's talking about behemoth existing while man is on earth. That contradicts modern science and evolutionary teaching. Behemoth lived with man. He's then described, let me change that for reference sake, Job 40, 17 and 18. But in Job 40, verses 17 and 18, watch this description of behemoth. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. Picture, you know what a cedar looks like. You picture that. It says the sinews of his stones. That's talking about his male portion, if you want to be nice about it. These were so large that they were like huge boulders wrapped together. And he makes description of that. I mean, we're dealing with scientific information, so you have to get, into some details that might seem a little inappropriate at any other time. But it also refers to his bones being strong pieces of brass, or as strong pieces of brass. They weren't brass, but they were as strong pieces of brass, and his bones are like bars of iron. This is a massive creature. Now, in your new Bibles, the modern scholars give us a hint of how ignorant they are in this text when they make incredible claims that this is probably a hippo or an elephant. And there's examples. New American Standard footnote says, or the hippopotamus. And same thing in the New Century Version. Down there's the NIV. Possibly the hippopotamus or the elephant. Now let's think about that. This is a cedar tree. This was a famous cedar tree in Vancouver, picture taken in 1897. Now this creature, behemoth, has a tail like a cedar tree. Does that look like a cedar tree?
No.
That's the tail of an elephant. Or a hippo. That's supposed to be a cedar tree?
It's a baby cedar tree.
Yeah, what is it? Seedling.
A seedling, yeah.
Obviously, you don't want to pay much attention to the notes of scholars in your Bibles.
Amen.
Pay attention to those infallible, inspired words in the text. Here's a picture of what an elephant or a rhino would look like, or a hippo would look like if they had a tail like a cedar.
That's great.
Miranda, have you ever seen an elephant with a tail like that? If you ever do, catch it, you'll be famous and rich. Because no one's ever seen an elephant with a tail like that, or a hippo. So this is obviously not talking about a hippo or an elephant. And I got that from Ken Ham, Answers in Genesis. Give credit where it's due. And then we have the Leviathan. Go over to Job 41, next chapter over. Job 41. And you have Leviathan, which is described as a sea creature. And in Job 41:1, it says, "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with an hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down?" In other words, are you going to take your rod and reel and reel in Leviathan? No, you can't. Because I put it, you can't catch and reel this big one in because the Leviathan's as big as your boat. That's how huge Leviathan is. You're not going to catch him and reel him in. Now, the next few verses we're going to read in Job 41 basically show us that Leviathan is too large to tame or to use in ways that other animals are trained and used as domestic pets. You're not going to have a pet in your backyard, a pet Leviathan, or in your basement. You're not going to train it for the circus or entertainment. And by the way, men have always done this. It's not just some recent thing that men have tamed animals for pets or to use in freak shows or whatever. And you're not going to put it in a zoo or cage it for some other show. And that's what these verses are going to show us. Leviathan is a massive creature. It's a sea dinosaur. Look in verses 2 through 4. Canst thou put an hook into his nose? No. There's not a hook big enough that it'll get in his nose and actually be able to hook and pull him. That's how huge he is. Or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? No, he roars. Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever, meaning tame him and use him to till your farm, your garden? No, you're not going to plow your garden with a Leviathan. And some of this is sarcasm, by the way. You see sarcasm in the Scripture. You need to recognize that, and it's a teaching tool. When you read Leviathan, you kind of get the idea of Nessie. I learned something. I went up a few years ago to visit my brother. He lives up in upstate New York, and Lake Champlain has its own Nessie. They call him Champ. I didn't even know that. And I'm out on a ferry boat going from one side of Champlain to the other, and about halfway through, my brother says, "Keep an eye out. There's a sea monster called Champ that they've said have turned over boats before." Like, now you tell me. Halfway across, either way, I'm kind of committed. Now, there have been a lot of people try to find Nessie and Champ, and they've never been able to find them. And I don't know if Champ and Nessie are real or not. I'm not making that claim. But I will not say they're not real. Just because they haven't been able to find those places, Loch Ness and Champlain, they are massive bodies of water. And yeah, there's underground areas where they could go for miles. You wouldn't even know it. They haven't even been able to actually document the entire terrain in these places.
They may stay deep.
Yeah. But it sure sounds very similar. I'm not saying that that's what Leviathan is. I'm just saying they're very similar. Verses 5 through 7, look at this. It's some sarcasm again. But wilt thou play with him as with a bird? Or wilt thou bind him for thy maidens? In other words, show off your pet. Shall the companions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed iron or his head with fish spears? That's what they did to a lot of other large animals. They just used every part for something. But you weren't doing that with Leviathan. Now, as you read Leviathan being described, it sounds very similar to a brachiosaur. And that's what some people have thought that maybe Nessie and Champ would be if we were ever to find out they're real and find them. But as you read this description of Leviathan and Behemoth, you find that they very closely resemble creatures we know exist. And the only difference is we believe they existed recently. In verses 8 through 10, he says, lay thy hand upon him, remember the battle, do no more. In other words, people have tried to kill Leviathan, and it's kind of like the story of Moby Dick. Didn't turn out well. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? Now look how massive and scary this creature is. None is so fierce that dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand before him? Now, the reason Job's using this is to say Leviathan is a creature created by God and you can't handle him. What makes you think you're going to be able to stand up to God and debate with him? Well, I just can't believe in a God like that. Well, you're out of luck. He's the only one going. And you better change your attitude. It's his way or the highway. You can't handle Leviathan. You're not going to change God. Repent. That's what Job's saying here. Now look what he says in verses 11 through 14. Who hath prevented me that I should repay him? Whatsoever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not conceal his parts, nor his power, nor his comely proportion. Who can discover the face of his garment? Or who can come to him with his double bridle? This is a description of his skin and what he looks like. And he says, who can open the doors of his face? You're not going to walk up to Leviathan and check out his gums, you bet Tex. It's not happening. Look what he says at the end. His teeth are terrible round about. Kind of reminds me of that. Leviathan teeth. Not saying that's necessarily Leviathan, but something similar. Now, notice this. His skin, his scales are described. It says his scales are his pride, shut up together as with a close seal. One is so near to another. It's like watertight, that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They stick together, that they cannot be sundered. His scales were so watertight that he could live in water. Even though, like a whale, we believe it was a air-breathing, oxygen-breathing, with lungs and all that. Now here's where people start to say the Bible is full of mythology, because we read in verses 18 through 19, by his neesings a light doth shine, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. So he has a fire mechanism.
I want him on my side.
Might have kind of looked like that.
That's global warming.
I couldn't pass that up. I saw that picture. I was like, man, I'm putting that in there. But
Got breath, I can produce global warming.
But verses 20 and 21 continues to describe this fire mechanism. It says, out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. There's probably a better picture of what it might have looked like. Now, people will then say, oh, there's no way. There's no way that existed. An animal that could breathe fire. What about that animal? Yeah. Now you say, well, that's trickery. He's got... Hey, I'm just saying that if it's that easy for man to shoot flames out of his mouth with just a little bit of invention, what makes you think it's too hard for God, who created animals that actually do this on a smaller scale even right now today? The bombardier beetle. Now, it's scaled down and shoots fire out of its opposite end. But it's the same idea. Now, we don't often do this, but I want to stop for a second. I want to show you. I think this is a full 1 minute clip. And I want you to watch this. This is the beetle.
If evolution is true, it had to somehow evolve that. So let's say it's coming along here. Well, the first time it evolves the explosion, what does it do to the bug? Boom, you just splattered your bug, okay? So splattered bug pieces don't evolve. So how could this have happened? Well, it doesn't blow itself up. It has another little factory inside itself that manufactures chemicals. A chemical acts as a catalyst so that when you squirt that chemical in with these other chemicals that are like in neutral, you get your explosion. Well, the first time it manufactured that little chemical, here it goes again, blew itself up again. But it doesn't. Why? Well, because it has like an asbestos-lined firing chamber. And even then it would blow itself up if it didn't have somewhere for the explosion to go. So it has like twin tail tubes. And it can aim these tail tubes all the way up, out the side, out the front. Let's say a spider is coming up toward its side and it doesn't have time to turn around and shoot. It can just take its little gun turret and aim it out there and shoot.
Now, you saw the description of the beetle having that, I want to go back to the previous shot there. It's two different chemicals. The lining is comparable to asbestos in this little bug. And then when the two chemicals shoot out and meet in the air, they cause the fire explosion. And
How they came up with a rocket?
I don't know. It very well could be. You know, it said, well, if it works for the beetle, why not for our rocket? Now, this fellow that you were just watching is basically making the claim that obviously this could not have evolved. The beetle would have just blown up as soon as it had those two chemicals together. And it's just, evolution is so ridiculous. It's hard for me to even, it's so ridiculous. But anyway, we're not here to talk about that. We're talking about the fact that if you have a bombardier beetle this big who can produce that, boom, just scale it up.
That's right. Yeah.
And put it in the front instead of the rear. But you have a dragon who has two glands with asbestos-like covering just like the beetle, and it shoots the chemicals out in front of its face with a force that shoots it this way. You've got yourself a fire-breathing dragon or dinosaur.
Bad piece of gas.
Huh?
Bad case of gas.
Bad case of gas, that's right. Tums will not cure that. So if you deal in terms of real science, this is no problem. It's only when you check your brain in and buy all the mythology that's being taught in the school system, that's the only time this gives you any trouble. Verses 23 and 24 go in again to describe, I believe he's telling you now, why does this fire shoot out and he's not burnt? He's not burnt because, as we said, he's got this watertight scale for skin. It says the flakes of his flesh, in verses 23 and 24, the flakes of his flesh are joined together. They are firm in themselves. They cannot be moved. And then it goes on to say his heart is as firm as a stone, yea, as hard as a piece of the nether millstone. They, at some point, found dead Leviathan and did basically probably cut him up to eat him. And as they did that, they autopsied him and they looked at him and they probably found this huge heart. And it was probably so hard they couldn't hardly cut through it, and that's why they describe it this way. It goes on then, and you picture the dinosaurs that the Jurassic Park kind of things, and this verse 25 says, when he raiseth up himself, the mighty are afraid. By reason of breakings they purify themselves. And yes, that means they dirty themselves. It's a nice way of saying they have to clean up after they mess their pants. When one of these things raises up on them, scares them literally to death. And by the way, if you want to make fun of people, don't act like you wouldn't respond that way if one of these things showed up and raised up over above you. You'd be changing your underwear too. Now let's go on in verses 26 through 29. It says, the sword of him that layeth at him cannot hold, the spear, the dart, nor the habergeon. He esteemeth iron as straw and brass as rotten wood. In other words, he just, with his teeth and the power, he can chomp through the ships in that day that utilized iron and steel, and the Leviathan would just chomp right through it. The arrow cannot make him flee. That's kind of like, shooting spit wads at an angry bear. I mean, these arrows they would shoot probably wouldn't even penetrate that thick skin. It was like, armor, bulletproof vest. It says the sling stones are turned with him into stubble. Darts are counted as stubble. He laugheth at the shaking of a spear. I'm going to get you. And it's like, ha, ha, ha. That's probably how Leviathan handled the hunters of his day. Continues, verses 30. I'm just going on to show you how detailed this description is. And it definitely sounds like a dinosaur. Sharp stones are under him. He spreadeth sharp pointed things upon the mire. He maketh the deep to... Now this is the fire mechanism. In the water, says he maketh the deep to boil like a pot. He maketh the sea like a pot of ointment. He maketh a path to shine after him. One would think the deep to be hoary. What I believe it's saying is he used that fire mechanism for one reason, would have been to light his way in the darkness so he would see what's out in front of him. And he probably just let off a little burp, and it would light up everything and he'd see, and he'd go a little further and burp, But then he could also use that to kill animals to eat. Yeah. Now, if you go to the Psalms, David says, now I kind of paraphrased a little bit here, Dan. David says God fed the Israelites with the Leviathan burgers. Turn, if you would, to Psalm 74 if you want. Psalm 74, David describes this event, strange event, in verse 13. Says, thou didst divide the sea by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the waters. Then it continues, verse 14 says, thou breakest the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and gavest him to be meat to the people inhabiting the wilderness. Leviathan burgers. So the bottom line in this study this morning is that dinosaurs are in the Bible. Dinosaurs existed with mankind. Dinosaur extinction was not millions of years ago because of a meteor. And we have to ask this question: do we reject the Bible for man's ideas? Romans 3:4 says, God forbid, yea, let God be true, but every man a liar. And that's our attitude. Especially should be our attitude whenever we can see that these modern scientists will not deal honestly with the facts. They will not even deal with a lot of the information that's been discovered. And they are so cowardice that they will not even debate people openly on the issue. Although they came to that conclusion after debating a few times with Ken Hovind, Ken Ham, Dwayne Gish, some of these guys from the Institute for Creation Research, other places. They did debate these guys for a while, and then they kept being laughed out of the joint. And so now they just refuse to even debate. Here in Worthington, Ohio, I wish I knew the man's name to give him credit. But we had a man coming to the Worthington School District to discuss the scientific facts. Wasn't going to crack open a Bible. He was just going to talk the scientific facts regarding the global warming hoax. Professors from Ohio State University, you know, that bastion of freedom of speech?
I don't agree with them.
They showed up at Worthington schools and shut it down, actually blocking the entrances, causing a scene. The cops were called in, and the people who were going to have it just called it off because they made such a ruckus. They got something to hide, folks. And I tell you this over and over, and you know, I want you to have this imagery. We live in a society that is in a cocoon of lies. And it's very similar to what you saw in some of these movies, but they have the opposite view, by the way, but like The Matrix. Only the world is being taught that religion and organized religion has controlled everything and have everything in a cocoon of lies. Well, there's some truth to that. But they include all religion, including Bible-believing Christianity in that, and that's not true. You research the Flat Earth Society. The Bible never has taught that the earth was flat. The Bible said it was a circle, and it was hung upon nothing. It was only the Jesuit-controlled Vatican and all their schools that forced everyone in the Western world to buy the idea of a flat earth. That's just one example that you're going to see repeated over and over and over and over. And in this context, we have a priest class called professors. Just like the ancient pagans had their priest class, we have ours. They're called professors. They do not allow themselves to be questioned. They get tenure. And if a student or a parent questions them, they silence them. And it's just like the religious control in the past, our new religion is education. Our new religion is the education system and the priestly class of professors. Now, I've told everybody, you know, Jenny's getting her degree. You have to play the game if you want a job, but you should be careful to only go in as far as you have to, and also go in armed and equipped to deal with it, and never allow them to cause you to question the Word of God. And at the same time, speak out against it and support whatever education alternatives we can that would give people the opportunity not to have to go through all that. And you, on an individual level, believe that book. Believe, the Bible says it effectually works in those who believe it. And I'm not saying this because I'm some big mega mind or brain or anything. But I'm just saying that if you do doubt things in that book, don't pretend. Come to me, come to Mike, come to anyone that you know is a believer who knows their Bible, and give us the opportunity to help you understand the facts around that and the information. And kids have gone off and been taught evolution and then come home and never tell their parents about it, and they just keep believing evolution, and then when they move out they go off the deep end and the parents are shocked. They had no idea that their child was being brainwashed and going off into that stuff. Well, it can happen to any of us. We all have to challenge what we're taught in the schools or elsewhere, TV or whatever. Yeah, especially TV these days.
Be sure to visit our website at kjvbiblebelievers.com, where you can find a wealth of MP3 audio message downloads, along with additional videos, articles, and links. This message is brought to you by Bible Believers Fellowship, P.O. Box 662, Worthington, Ohio 43085. I am Greg Miller. Thank you for listening.